the chances of being discovered for my creative talent was next to zero.
Hi, I'm Abi Dare, the author of The Girl with the Loud Voice,
a New York Times best-selling author published by Penguin Random House, who shares the story of Aduni, who teaches us about having a louding voice.
Aduni is my main character in The Girl with the Loud Voice.
Learns that the discipline of writing and the power of consistency, the power of not despising humble beginning issues or concerns. Every single one of us has a voice. Every one of us has a voice that can be heard, right? And that is what you're passionate about, what you feel you could potentially do for free. I believe that one day that thing will earn you some money and will give your life a meaning, regardless of what it is.
Before we let the stories of the past shape your future, it would mean the world to me if you could follow us or subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us. Enjoy the conversation. So, without any further ado, Brandon, let the stories of the past
shape your future on the
Quoting Life podcast.
Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
My first question to you is, you've had this amazing background story growing up in Lagos, Nigeria. I'm an author, so maybe you'll actually do this, which is to write an autobiography, but if you were to do one, where would this story start? What would be those initial chapters?
I think you'll probably be at the point when I think turned about 4 years old, and which is when I really realized that I love to write stories, and how I used to write letters to my mom. So it wasn't with fiction; it was real, true life events that had happened while my mom was away. I think writing that and living that through my journey into coming to the United Kingdom, into studying law, and then now becoming a writer. Yeah, I think 4 years old is when I'll start.
And is that something you've always done? Like, you've started at 4, and you've always wrote ever since? Like, how has early days writing looked for you? Like, what were you writing about?
I think it was just, I mean, I've got 2 children now, and I look at my daughters, and I realize that it's probably the same. So probably started around about maybe 2-3 years old when I could write at first. I think I used to, when I first started to form my words, I think I was very expressive. And then when I turned about 4 or 5 years old, I moved into writing letters, and letter writing continues to be a form of expression for me. I find that I communicate better when I write emails to people. So if you upset me, I would probably not sit you down and have a conversation with you. I'll probably write it out. And I did that when I was sort of 4 or 5 years old, because my mom would travel for work. And when she gets back, I would have written her a lot of letters about what happened while she was away. And that carried on through till secondary school, I think, when I started to write plays. So I wrote terrible plays in secondary school. But then I realized that I loved the world of make-believe as well, because I could control something. You can't control a lot of what happens to you. But when you're in the world of make-believe, like fiction or in film, you can actually say, well, I detect a happy ending for this character. And so I think I fell in love with fiction, I think, around about the secondary school age, which is about between 12-ish and 16.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and did you always know you were a great writer, someone who would go on to write many incredible stories at the start, or did you have other career paths in mind as well?
I did. I think that I'm still very much surprised by what has happened with my career. I did nurse a tiny, tiny bit, and not a tiny aspect. And I think that's because when I was growing up in Africa, I did have a good background. I wasn't born into poverty or anything like that, but I think succeeding as a creative in my generation in the 90s wasn't something I was very much, it wasn't popular. It wasn't a thing that was done on YouTube. So the chances of being discovered for my creative talent was next to zero, right? And even if I knew that I was going to study abroad at some point, I knew I was going to do my university abroad, I still didn't think that anything would come out of writing. Because again, writing is one of those sort of talents or gifts that, being sort of a Black woman from Africa at that time, our stories were not very well told and not very well received, or rather they were being told but not very well received. So there were only 1 or 2 very big African authors at the time. So I didn't think there would be any. So it came as a surprise to me, and I did want to be a lawyer. Well, I didn't want to be a lawyer. My mother wanted me to be a lawyer, and she paid my school. So I sort of brought it upon myself that I would love to be a lawyer. And I think I enjoyed studying law, but towards the end of my final year, I knew it was 100% not for me. And then I kind of got stuck, and I wasn't sure what I would do in my career after that. I really, really suffered kind of a breakdown towards the end of my final year studying law, because it's a lot of work. And then you get to the end of 4 years and you think that this is not what I want to do in my life. It's a very scary place to be.
I think that's a lot of people's stories of it's almost it takes sometimes times like we sell ourselves on this idea that we want to do something and then further on in life we realize well actually it was either societal pressures or parent pressures. Do you think we almost need to experience those for ourselves to figure it out, or is there a way to like mitigate those things, or have some way of thinking about where do they come from?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I think that, I'm trying to look at my kids and I look at them a lot and I'm saying that what do they enjoy right now? And I'm trying to use that to gauge what I hope would forge their path. I truly believe that if you do what you thoroughly enjoy, and that is what you're passionate about, what you feel you could potentially do for free, I believe that one day that thing will earn you some money and will give your life a meaning, regardless of what it is. And I think it's even easier these days when you don't even need to go out and find an audience. You can actually sit in your room and put a phone on and actually find your audience. And so, while yes, I know that it's good to experience those things, I say, why waste 4 or 5 years of your life trying to be a doctor when you know that you want to be a YouTuber, sharing videos of yourself doing skateboarding because that's what you love to do, right? However, I do believe that getting an education is absolutely critical as a foundation of your life. And so I say to my kids, look, I know you might want to be whatever you want to be in future, but get your education out of the way first. And I say education, I mean your formal education, primary, secondary, and university degree. Get those out of the way. Let that be the foundation. But alongside that, do anything else you want to be. Because that helps you to decide that should that passion, that talent not translate into a career, you don't feel quite frustrated. Because the reality is sometimes it doesn't translate into a career. Sometimes you can't do that for a living. And you do need to earn money to be able to live a reasonably comfortable life. So it's a case of just trying to do both at the same time, but not putting all your effort into one basket. If that makes sense.
Right. And we know from the stories that you've told that you had to write about 1 million words before you got your first yes. Like, I know that you wrote around 10 books before getting published, and immediately after getting published, you got a lot of popularity, won some awards, a lot of success. Can you kind of walk us through the journey of your grit and passion and sticking to writing?
Right. No, it wasn't up to 10. It was about 6.5-ish. A lot of deleted stuff. But I started with writing stories, short stories that I'll share with family and friends. I had a blog. Actually, I started with a blog. I had a blog, and I don't know how many words went into that blog, but it was a lot of words, a lot of daily discipline of writing. I think that's when I first learned that the discipline of writing and the power of consistency, the power of not despising humble beginnings, right? So there's something in the Bible that I love that says, "Do not despise humble beginnings." And I think it affects every one of us, regardless of what faith you are. That something small that you do day by day would one day become big, and that's what it was with my blog. It was one of those examples of when I was blogging, thinking I was anonymous, thinking nobody would know about me. For some reason, someday something happened, and everybody was reading my blog. And I suddenly wasn't ready for that kind of exposure. I wasn't ready for that kind of success at the time. I'm talking 20 odd years ago. So I was young and I wasn't ready for that. And I didn't want anyone to know who I was. So I stopped blogging and I carried on. Then I started to write fiction and sharing that fiction with family and friends, self-publishing it, handing it out to people, my brother, my friends, my then fiance, sort of pressing into people's hands and saying, "You've got to read this book." And people say, "No, not really." Getting a lot of rejections from publishers. And so when I get the rejection, I'll sort of self-publish it because I'm thinking, what's the point anyway? I've written it, so I might as well just share it with people. And that carried on until I think it was about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. Yeah, 5, 6 years ago. that I decided to do a master's in creative writing. And I think I wanted to do a master's degree. It would be my second master's degree, because A, I love education. B, I felt that I wanted some validation. And to anyone listening to this, sometimes you do need to seek validation, not because it's the right thing to do, but because sometimes it helps. But I would say be prepared that if that validation does not come, have it at the back of your mind that it doesn't matter. I'm still going to keep doing this anyway because I truly believe in it. And so I wanted to seek validation from the academic world of creative writing, because if I had not gotten a yes from the publishing world, I felt that at least I could go into the academia and maybe start lecturing creative writing, because I love it so much that I didn't want it to depart from me. So with that, going on that master's degree turned things around for me, because the book that then brought me the publicity and the publisher's attention was what was my thesis as part of my master's degree. So in a way, sort of going down that path has turned out to be quite amazing. But even if it hadn't, I think I might have stepped away from that master's degree and started teaching people creative writing, hoping that maybe they'll get to do that thing, which I maybe wasn't able to do at the time. So I just believe strongly in that. And so that's sort of been the trajectory of my career. And then I went on to, after I'd written my thesis, which was The Girl with the Loud Voice, my novel, I put it in for a writing competition. I won that, surprisingly, amazingly won that out of 1,700 people. And the rest is history. And after that, my book got published and is now been published in 20 languages, and it's been taught in schools and institutions worldwide. And it's just been an amazing journey so far. But it wasn't always amazing. I think it's important to say that there were many moments of crying and frustration and banging my head against the wall and trying to do other things like sell shoes and sell onion slices and and then and just feeling very, very lost.
But I'm also wondering, because you said you had so many rejections. So when it finally happened, like you even say, it came a bit of a surprise that you won that competition to begin with. Did you have a what now moment once you became a New York Times bestselling author? Was there this moment of, well, I've achieved my dream of becoming a published author? Well, no. Did you have that like famous moment that so many people talk about once they accomplish their dreams?
I've had many. I mean, I've had a for me, right? This will be different for other people. For me, I've had the kind of many amazing moments I've had in this journey of this particular book feels like I could have published 10 books with the publisher and not had this kind of. So it feels like everything just happened in one book. So I was speaking to somebody today who helps me with my social media, and I was saying I would love to do a throwback to when Dolly Parton said that my book was her favorite book of 2020. And I realized that was such a huge moment for me. I mean, I grew up listening to Dolly Parton in cars, and my mother loved Dolly Parton. And to hear her say in her lovely accent that, I love that little girl about Aduni, the character in my book, that was such an amazing moment. It was a moment of I was thinking, I don't think anything could beat this. But then other things have happened since then, so many TV appearances and all of that. So I've had a lot of wonderful moments that feel like I think it's a good thing to enjoy those moments, but not to saturate yourself with it, not to let it stop you from trying to do more and be more and reach for more, to remain humble in the grace that you have, to remain humble in all the success. I think it's important to have that, or else you will remain stagnant and you wouldn't grow. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think to me, I've taken it as this is an amazing moment. I bask in it, but there's always going to be more amazing moments. And so the best thing to do is just keep going and keep improving yourself.
That's a good way of looking at it, for sure.
And you brought up your book, The Girl with the Louding Voice, and I know Louding Voice talks about empowerment. Can you kind of explain it to our audience? How can we find our louding voice?
Well, that's a very good question. I think that, if you need to find your louding voice, you need to first of all know yourself. Like, who are you? What matters to you? What are your values? What is important to you? And who are you trying to reach with your louding voice? Who's your audience? Why does this matter? Why does this thing that you want to put out there, why does it matter? And how can it affect positive change? Because not all change is positive. I think it's important that it has to be positive change and that which is lasting. And I know that it feels like sometimes you think, how can you have something that's lasting? So we're having this conversation here. It will be recorded. It will be available in the next 5 years. There might be somebody right now who is currently, 15 years old. I would need to listen to this in 5 years' time when they're 20, because that's exactly when they need it, because they're, currently going through depression. And this come up across, and it's going to lift them out of the depths of that darkness and reach out to do something meaningful. Now imagine if you both didn't decide to sit down today because you thought, well, nobody's going to listen to this anyway. So I always believe that putting the seeds of what you do, what you believe in, out into the atmosphere, I believe it will find the right soil. And when it falls into the right soil, that it will be planted and it will grow. And you thinking about that would sort of keep you going, you fuel you, it'll help you have that louding voice. And that's the ing behind the loud, right? You living your life in the best way possible to affect change in a positive way, to empower people and yourself, but realizing that you can't live a very selfish life. I know everybody says, self-care. Self-care is great, but I think it's even better when you care for yourself, but while thinking about others as well, especially the less privileged. So I think it's important for me. And that's the sort of the way I frame it. And I believe that because barring sort of any medical sort of issues or concerns, every single one of us has a voice. Every one of us has a voice that can be heard, right? And because we all have a voice, we all should have outputs. There's something in you that no one else has, and makes you unique and makes you stand out. And that thing is yours so that you can lift somebody else up. I truly, truly believe that.
It seems like there's a lot of parallels between the louding voice and a passion or purpose. But it seems like there's something more to a louding voice. What's that difference? What's that something extra that a louding voice has that a purpose or a passion doesn't have?
Wow, that's a deep question. I think that, purpose can sometimes be selfish. I think if you feel that your purpose is to have a lot of money, and some people do feel that. So I ask you, for what, right? There's only so many houses you can live in, so many cars. I was saying to my husband the other day, I said to him, I was sitting on the sofa, I said, I can only sit on one sofa at a time. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to acquire so many sofas. If that's what you want to do, fine. But always think about somebody else. I think that's the louding. The louding is the extension of yourself to positively affect somebody else. And that's why it's important to know who you're trying to help, to change their lives, to affect them positively, to empower them and influence them. You've got to know who those people are, because, or even if you don't know them, you've got to imagine that there's somebody there that you could make better by an extension of yourself and of what you do. But doing that within the right boundaries and the right parameters, because of course we can really talk about you constantly sort of getting drained in that process. So it's not about you getting drained. It's about you empowering yourself so it's the so that you can empower others. Purpose may sort of blur the edges a little bit because, everybody has a different view as to what purpose is. But I believe regardless of what your purpose is, which is important, think about somebody else, think about others, and see how you can make a difference in their lives.
I connect so strongly to something I heard Simon Sinek say the other day, to where we all have our individuals' whys or purposes, but there's an over-encompassing why to humanity, and it's to serve those who are in service to others. And I think even we were speaking to someone yesterday, and their why was also to serve others. I think there's something so powerful and something that connects us all. I don't think there's one human alive that would probably say that, oh, they didn't feel good when they helped someone.
Exactly. In fact, I was researching and I realized that actually scientifically, your body, your brain releases a kind of hormone. I will double check that because I remember reading that when you give and when you help. And I think it sort of makes sense when you look at some of the richest people in the world, how they kind of feel empty after a while because they realize they've acquired so much, but they still feel like there's nothing in them. They feel like they're sort of floating in this sort of abyss of purposelessness, right? And so they have made the purpose. They've invented this amazing thing. Let's use Dyson as an example. I'm not talking about him, but I'm just saying he's inventing these amazing things. But then you have a conversation with him, for instance, as an example, and he says to you, look, I want to give everything away. You're thinking, you're nuts. But that's because he's gotten to a point where, and this happens with a lot of super wealthy people, they've acquired so much, they've gotten to a point where they realize that even in all of the acquisition, there's still a sense of dissatisfaction that can only be fulfilled when when they're putting a smile on somebody else's face. That feeling is unmatchable that you get when you make somebody else smile. And I think we're all searching for that either consciously or subconsciously. We just don't realize it. And sometimes it takes you acquiring a lot and realizing that everything you've acquired will not bring you happiness. It's not even a might not. It's confirmed. There's no one that I know that has found joy and true deep soulful satisfaction by just material things. It just doesn't. Life just does not work that way.
I think I've even done that exercise with you where I've said, okay, imagine you had all this money 15 years on the line, what would you do with it, right?
Right. Yeah, like I do agree with you. There's only so much you can acquire before you kind of don't feel as fulfilled on the inside. And for me, whenever I ride the transit system, it could be a little messy sometimes, and people are a little hostile. And why do you think if giving can make you happy, why don't people do more of that?
Because there's sometimes I can't answer for anybody, but I wasn't always a giver, and I had a fear of poverty. And I think that one way or the other, we all sometimes subconsciously have that fear of poverty. We feel that when we give, we kind of lose something. We lose something that we should have, and we don't want to lose that. There's an experiment that you can even do yourself. If you clench your fists, so you don't want to give anything out, but how can you receive when your fist is still clenched? So it's in the giving, the opening of your hands out, that you actually also receive. And often what you receive by law of whatever you might call it, karma, multiplication, sowing and reaping, there's so many ways to describe these things. What you give always comes back to you a lot more. So why not give? So I think a lot of us have this fear of poverty. Sometimes we have a fear of being taken granted of, that if you give, people will take you for granted. And sometimes people do take the piss when you give all the time. But I think it's learning and knowing how to set boundaries. I mean, Oprah is an example of somebody who's done this brilliantly. I know she'll probably have personal stories of things that have gone wrong with her giving, but she's done this so well. And so has Ellen DeGeneres as well. They've given in beautiful ways, in many ways, that is hard to see how they have a regret. They can regret doing this, right? It's really hard to see. But then I don't live their lives. I don't know them personally, so they might have stories. But I think there will always be more joyful stories than sort of the sad ones.
And on the notion of giving, we've broadened this conversation education a lot, and I think that's something you try to give. Education, and I kind of wanted to touch or have your perspective on the importance of education, because I've been fortunate enough to be in a program here in Sauder where we teach entrepreneurship in Kenya. And it's been this amazing thing where you log into the online class and people are just so interested in what you're about to say. And education is seen on such a pedestal, and it's like this amazing thing. And even reading like the opening chapters of The Girl with the Louding Voice, like there's this huge emphasis on how education is this amazing thing. And yet some of my weeks in class and my friend even testified to this, like, we see a whole row of students sleeping, right? And taking education for granted. So I'm really wondering, and even how you're speaking, like education is this like important thing. What's your perspective on the importance of education?
Oh wow! I mean, education. I believe is the foundation. Well, first of all, I believe it's a fundamental human right. I believe it's as important as the right to live, right to as long as we talk about children. As long as every child is born, I believe that child should have a right to go to school, at least up until a certain age, and then after that they can choose to do what they want to do. But it's almost like you saying that you have a child and you're not sure whether to feed that child because they'll die, they don't eat. That's how it is with education. I think that mentally, emotionally, will die, right? In terms of the development of our brains, education opens doors in ways, and I always say to people that I'm not talking about financially here. I'm talking about the simple things like being able to make decisions for yourself, to be informed about your choices, to be able to make those choices, to be able to communicate with people, to be able to understand what people are saying to you, to learn new things, to open your eyes, to imagine what you can become, and then to become. That's what education allows you to do. It opens those doors. Now, I know that there's a difference between quality education and standard education. I say to people, at the minimum, give every child a standard education. If we can get good quality education, even better. So it's so important for me, because I know that I come from a part of the world that this right is denied of millions, especially girls. And it's sad to see, because there's a saying that goes, if you educate a girl, you educate a nation, right? Because you're not just stopping the chances that this girl has in life, you're killing her intelligence and that of the generations to come after her. So you can imagine if this girl is destined to have 3 kids, who then have 3 kids, who then have 3 kids. So that's 9 people denied an education, assuming they all don't get an education because you denied one person. Just imagine the future that would be, multiply that by millions. And so, I think it's such a shame that we're in 2023, we're talking about 10 million girls out of school in Nigeria. We're talking about 132 million children out of school in the world. We're talking about lack of access to quality education at secondary level, at university level, at tertiary level. I think it's such a shame. And I hope that we get away from that point very, very.
Do you think there's also a problem in most of the Western world with a thirst for education? And I'm wondering are you doing anything with your daughters at a young age to instill that sense of curiosity or that thirst for education?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's important to understand, especially the West, we have access to free at least in England, we have access to free education. And so I think a lot of people don't, when you have something for free and you don't have to fight for it, you don't really see it as a privilege. You can't take it for granted. And which is why I write books like why I wrote Girl with a Loud Voice, because I wanted everyone to understand that this is not something that everybody gets. Now, with my kids, we have a lot of conversations. What I do with them is beyond what they get in school. We often sit on YouTube, and bless YouTube, it's such an incredible educational tool. We sit on YouTube and we look at videos of countries, of people living in extreme poverty. And I say to them, look, listen, you are privileged. You've got to remember that every single day of your life and be thankful for it. But not just be thankful for it, but grab onto everything you've been given and use it to thrive, because you have a platform that other people don't have. And if you took away what you have and gave it to somebody else, you'd be amazed at what they can do with it. Like, they would turn it into gold. And so you sitting here and playing games. Yeah, you can play games. My kids and I have this thing all the time. Like, you can play Roblox for hours, but why don't you use that time, half it into 2, right? And use it to do something else. Educate yourself a little bit more. And so I think that way, and also just going beyond, like I said, going beyond the 4 walls of classrooms, going to museums, learning about different cultures, meeting people from different cultures, understanding their way of life, how they live. That's a form of education. Broadening their minds, realizing that we are all different and we live our lives in different ways. I'm trying to understand different people, different points of views, so that you can make informed choices in the future. So yeah, I do that with my kids because I learn from them as well. So they educate me with the latest slangs that's going on in schools, and all of that is a form of education. So I say, keep your mind open and absorb as much as you can.
It's almost like tying everything back into where having the possibility of expressing your loud voice, like in Ghana, like we have this, university behind us and a great country like Canada, and we have this opportunity to share our loud voice, and it's not only for us, but almost as if it's a must or an obligation for the people who don't have that platform, right? Like you're tying back into how there's this importance of some people don't have access to education, so therefore it is important for you to take advantage of that opportunity. I think it kind of ties in also to having a loud voice. Like, it's important to live your purpose out because some people aren't able to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And One tradition that our podcasts have is to share a quote that our previous guest left with our guest and get your thoughts on it. So this quote is coming from someone who started a nonprofit empowering women in Africa. And the quote goes, "The energy is in the purpose, not the plan." What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's powerful because a plan without a purpose for me is just a piece of paper or a piece of software. It does nothing. It could live there forever. But I think purpose is the fuel that drives your passion. So that's my quote, if you're asking me for mine. Purpose is the fuel that drives the passion. And without that fuel to drive that passion, you would go unheard and unnoticed. And I feel like you would, yeah, it'll be a flat vision. It'll be a flat existence. And you don't want that. So I agree with that. That, we can plan all we want, but if you don't execute it, what's the point? And for you to get up and execute something to the excellence that it deserves, you do need to have that fuel, and that fuel is your purpose. It fuels that passion.
Thank you so much for coming on, Abby. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode. As a growing channel, it would be so amazing if you would take one more minute of your day to reshare this episode on any platform you're liking. Hope to see you next week.